Today's hearing will be broadcast on the web, and we can also connect online. Today's agenda will begin with a hearing with the Commissioner of the U.S. Committee on International Religious Freedom.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you for allowing me to share some thoughts and make some recommendations for you to consider going forward. I just wanted to begin by thanking Italian Parliament for this opportunity, as well as my colleagues from the embassy for facilitating my visit to Rome. I am ethnically Uyghur. You may have been seeing news about the ongoing genocide in China against the Uyghur people. I have different identities, an immigrant, U.S. government official, lawyer. The most important thing for me today is my Uyghur identity that has been under assault by Xi Jinping's China. The Uyghur genocide now, it's in sixth year. It started in late 2016. Despite the United States and our partners and allies taking some actions in response to the ongoing genocide, we have not been able to stop it. Before I get into some of the specific work that we have done and some relatable information to today's discussion, I wanted to briefly tell you what we are, who we are, what we do as part of the U.S. government. U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom was established under the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998 to monitor and report and make policy recommendations to the President, Secretary of State, and Congress annually or regularly. We have 9 commissioners appointed by the President and the congressional leadership. I was appointed by former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi in May 2020, and I was reappointed last summer. I am serving my second 2-year term. We can serve up to 4 years at 2 terms. And we rotate leadership. Last year I was serving as a vice chair. Since June, I have been elected as the chair of this commission. Our work is supported by 24 professional staffers, experts in various issues, international relations, foreign policy, international religious freedom, and in some academic areas as well. My counterpart is the Ambassador Large for International Religious Freedom at the State Department. State Department has its own International Religious Freedom Office, bigger than our operations, our budget. And the United States is arguably the only country that has been invested so much time and energy and resources in the work to advance and protect religious freedom around the world. For those who have been subject to religious repression or persecution, and those who don't want to believe in any religion. Our job is not to go out and promote one religion over another. Our job is to make sure that the countries adhere to their obligations under the international law. Our job is also focus on something very important as part of American tradition. As you may know, that religious freedom is the first human rights for American people. It's in our Declaration of Independence. It set this foundation for Bill of Rights, and Bill of Rights is the foundation for the Declaration of Human Rights. So we have a long tradition. So we wanted to make sure that our foreign policy agenda includes promotion and protection of human rights and religious freedom around the world. I came to the Commission from a legal profession. I'm a lawyer by training. I'm specialized in anti-bribery, anti-corruption, investigation, enforcement work. And in addition to that, I'm also heavily involved in policy work involving China as part of my another role at the Hudson Institute, where I work with former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and other China experts. As I alluded earlier, U.S. government have been laser focused. It may sound hyperbolic, but it's been very, very significant. The level and the way that U.S. government in bipartisan fashion focused on China, specifically on the issue of Uyghurs. As somebody who worked in the intersection of law, government, human rights for so long, we're talking about 2 decades, I never thought that I would be seeing the level of response that we have seen in Washington, the level of interest, the commitment, the fact that I have embassy colleagues here arranging this opportunity speaks volume how much our government cares about these issues. How did we get here? Late 2016, Chinese appointed a very repressive individual by the name Chen Quanguo, who was then party secretary in Tibet, as the new party secretary in Xinjiang. In the Chinese system, Communist Party rules, sets the stage, sets the tone. Even today, when you look around and listen to some policy experts saying Chinese government does this, Chinese government doesn't do that, it's misleading. It's not the Chinese government, it's the Chinese Communist Party sets the agenda. National security agenda, foreign policy agenda, economic agenda. It's a Communist Party, a ruled state. Similarly, for the same purpose, they appointed a very ruthless, repressive individual with a track record, impressed Xi Jinping to run the affairs of Xinjiang. As reported in the New Yorker magazine, Chen Quanguo takes his internal security apparatus from Lhasa, Tibet Lhasa, to Urumqi, Xinjiang, set up this command center in an old government hotel. It looks like a sci-fi movie. He essentially worked and lived in that old government hotel. If you're interested, there's an article written about him in the New Yorker magazine. It's a very riveting article. So after he arrived, after given this resources and means and tools, even seat in the Politburo, powerful Politburo, which is very unusual for provincial level officials, he came up with the idea to engage in evasion de-extremification campaign starting April 2017. With the help of algorithm, artificial intelligence, the personal data that they collected through communications on WeChat, Chinese built a massive database, start rounding up people. I recently published a good book called No Escape. I have a chapter on how this came to our attention. In one instance, in summer 2017, in one village, the computer, Chinese police computer, ordered an arrest of 20,000 people in one village. This was leaked. This is in the leaked document published a couple of years ago. The police cannot find 20,000 people. How did they come up with 20,000 people? Based on the travel history, based on family connection, guilt by association still in practice today, and also past writing, past speeches, even at the lectern. So individuals in this massive database were laid the foundation for this mass arrest started in the Uyghur homeland. In the one village, in just 10 days, 17,000 people's lives are shattered. Fast forward, this continued. In 2020, 2019, China's published a white paper, specifically, actually in a very, very flattery way. It says that they managed to put through 1.3 million Uyghurs through a re-education program. That is, if you add them up in 5 years, you come up with a staggering number. Even in conservatively speaking, based on U.S. Department of Defense, 2 to 3 million Uyghurs were detained or have been detained. Based on New York Times, 800,000 to 1 million Uyghur children forcibly separated. Based on former Secretary Pompeo's statement on official recognition of the genocide recognition, the Uyghur woman subject to forced sterilization. There is a willful, a systematic, a deliberate attempt to prevent natural population growth. This also has been articulated in the Article 2 of the Genocide Convention. And also that they're using technology. I briefly mentioned the algorithm. So what they did is to encourage people to use WeChat, encourage people to use apps developed in Silicon Valley called Zappio, to exchange religious text, and then the government collected that, and then unleash and start collecting, detaining people. And the other method that has been used is also something related to Italy. Your interests, my interests, our moral values, our freedom, our sovereignty, which is enslavement of millions of Uyghur people in the global supply chain. When the Chinese said publicly, they said it a number of times, even some good-hearted, good-intentioned politicians believing in that they have been releasing people. In fact, releasing people from the camps is transferring from one camp to another. In the first instance, they transfer Uyghur intellectuals from the camps to a prison, imposing anywhere 10 to 15 years of imprisonment. We're talking about former president of Xinjiang University, former editor of Xinjiang Civilization magazine. By the way, that is a government publication. We have an Uyghur American living in Washington. His father is 73, former editor of Xinjiang Civilization magazine, now languishing in prison. And then the other group is the children. They took away their parents, and then the parents cannot provide care, and then the children end up being, the Chinese in a way committing genocide against children. And then the third, when they say they transfer the Uyghurs, the working age individuals to the assembly line to perform slave labor. What we're talking about is here 83 global brands. Anything from computer components, ketchup, tomato sauce, undershirt. Actually, this shirt that I'm wearing is made by one of those companies implicated. I bought this 5-7 years ago. I cannot just throw it away. I'm still wearing it. It's called Charles Tyler, the British brand. They pulled out of the Chinese market. At least they're doing the right thing under the pressure. And that includes solar panels, the batteries for electric vehicles. The solar panel is the really, really disturbing aspect. Those of us who rightfully, reasonably care about the climate should be mindful that when we hear that climate experts saying that, we need to cooperate with China, is also misleading. China is the country that is still approving coal-powered power plants, even though they're making publicly. There's no oversight. We cannot monitor. China is the country not only stealing our technology, but using dirty coal to make solar panels, using slave labor. And China is the country that the government subsidized this important sector. So what in the world that we can say we can compete? Or what in the world we can say that we can continue to use China-made solar panels to make ourselves feel good? So these are the things need to be looked at. And finally, this is something related to my, so the Uyghurs were not safe in China, but also, like myself, are not safe outside of China. I have not seen my mother since 2004. And my crime, quote unquote, is to speak out against the regime. I'm an American citizen, now a US official. I should not be worried about the safety of my family members. I do. I do worry. And on top of that, I've been sanctioned by China in retaliation against what my government did in response to the ongoing Uyghur genocide. After the Biden administration's announcement of the diplomatic boycott in December 2021, China sanctioned me and a few other government officials. This past May, Putin sanctioned me as well, along with a significant number of US government officials. And my circumstances, my situation is much more manageable compared to millions of others Uyghurs around the world. Specifically, they cannot talk to their family members. I'm sure that it is the case with your fellow Italian Uyghur community members. If you do, they can monitor, they can punish. And they're also harassing the individuals, the activists, outside of the Chinese boundaries. So the Uyghurs outside of China is not safe. In my book, I give the book the title No Escape because I have not been able to escape the China's persecution. And also, they're also using that to non-Uyghur individuals. That includes government officials, threatening them. There have been some public outcry, a public statement made by members of Congress in the United States that certain lobbyists, certain lobbying group, interfering the normal course of business in the U.S. Congress, lobbying on behalf of unfairly inserting influence. You know, the lobbying is not an illegal practice in the United States, but there's an ethical concern. Lobbying for some Chinese tech firms, they have been implicated in the ongoing genocide is something questionable. So I would like to make a couple of recommendations, if I can, quickly. 3 years ago, there was a report published by CSIS, a Washington-based think tank, that stated that export volume to Italy during the period of April 2019 and April 2020 doubled because of Italy's ongoing business relationship with China, specifically in the textile sector. That needs to stop. This is not about the Uyghur people crying out loud for support from the Western democratic societies. So when we start being complicit, keep buying slave labor produced products, and comfortably wrapping our babies in the baby pajamas made by a fellow human being, enslaved human being, I think it's a gut-checking moment for us. This is a serious, but in response, the United States government legislated something so powerful. It could be better, in my initial approach. We passed a bill called the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, presumptively making everything, labeling everything coming to the United States from Xinjiang made with slave labor. Rebuttable presumption is the term that they use, unless, up until they're proven otherwise. So we put a lot of pressure on the businesses, creating legal, reputational investment and consumer risk. This is the model that I would like the Italian Parliament to seriously consider. And this is in line with our relationship with Italy, that we believe in liberty, we believe in freedom. We don't believe in enslaving fellow human beings. It's as simple as that. So we gotta act upon this. The other thing is also very, very important. The overseas police service centers that has been identified. And the Italian government's response has been extremely lackluster and disappointing. We need to declare an end to all bilateral cooperation agreements with MPS, Chinese Ministry of Public Security, that is known to set up these or support facilitating these satellite police stations in our countries. This is very important. The United States is not exempt from this practice, but the United States has been indicting individuals engaging in this kind of transnational repression. Same model should be considered. And full investigation to those agreements with the MPS need to be looked at. Italian Parliament should exert oversight authority to look into what on earth that Italian police can sign an agreement with a communist government and most repressive arm of the Chinese government, MPS. That is a questionable behavior. And also suspend the extradition treaty with China. It's very, very important. And also, I am pleased and I'm happy, and I need to acknowledge, I wanted to thank you for joining our effort in the G7, joining our president, and your willingness to address the slave labor issues in G7 2021. I also wanted to highlight something that has also been kind of gaining steam here, to officially recognize the atrocities committed against the Uyghurs as a genocide. And this is something that Italian government must do. That's what your treaty obligation is under the Article 1 of the Genocide Convention. And with that, I'd like to stop here and be happy to take, I know there's a lot of issues, and I need the 3 hours to go over all of it, but thank you.
Your book?
The name of my book is No Escape.
And a copy of the book for the Commission?
I can send you a copy. I would gladly send you a copy.
Allora, Possiamo cominciare.
We can move on to our discussion, open up the floor to members of the committee. Thank you, President, and I would also like to thank our guest, Nury Turkel, and I would like to thank him and acknowledge his courage and his fight for the rights of the Uyghurs, rights that we realize that the Chinese are repressing. And unanimously, this committee approved a resolution condemning, again, unanimously, what China is doing against the Uyghurs. And that resolution covers a series of issues and topics that you just mentioned, reaffirming that that is a genocide. What is happening in China is truly a genocide, separating children from their families, from their parents, and repressive surveillance through digital technologies and facial recognition using video surveillance, re-education camps and detention camps. What the Italian government has been able to do is significant because they have clearly stated and clearly condemned what is being done in China, by China, at international level, so that we can do something to stop this brutal persecution and genocide. So thank you for your testimony. We will continue to work on these issues. And of course, we have to focus our attention, especially now when China is trying to gain power at an international level.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your kind words and I appreciate your support. You know, at this point, you know, as a Uyghur, I can say this: whatever you do, on a policy level, on a community level, and governmental level, is about you, about the future. The damage that the Chinese has caused, the family time that taken away from me, can never be returned. Once you take somebody into the camp and force that person to go through indoctrination, dehumanization, hour after hours, that can break human spirit. I think those people who have taken to the camp and spent last 5-6 years, sadly, will never be allowed to have a normal life. What is important today is the future. I do what I do because I don't want my children to go through what I'm gone through. I have 2 beautiful kids. They have not met their grandparents. My dad passed away, and my mother is still stuck in China. I have not seen her since 2004. The Chinese won't let her leave. And I'm dying to introduce my kids to their grandmother. And my brothers have the same problem. My parents had 5 US-born grandchildren, 9 grandchildren altogether. 3 of them are European citizens. They haven't met except for 2. That enough is up. What kind of world, you know, that you can think it's normal? Myself, I cannot meet my mother for 19 years. What has she done? Nothing. Guilt by other than being my mother. Guilt by association. So the damage to me and others have been done, irreversible, but we wanted to be able to tell our kids that we did something while we had the power to make it impactful, make an impact.
Thank you for your words, because these are things that we hear, but hearing it from you today certainly has a different impact and is a wake-up call for many of us. I am a dual citizen. I'm also a citizen of the United States, and so I was able to witness firsthand how the relations between the United States and China has changed over the few years, and the recommendations that are that I agree with. But China uses its strength, is trying to use its strength. And when Mike Pompeo was Secretary of State, there were sanctions imposed against China. If I am correct, these sanctions are less strict over the past few years. And you mentioned solar panels, which is a clear example of what is being done in China, because in addition to forced labor of miners in China, but there's also production of objects and products that are being sold all over the world with toxic and hazardous materials. So together with Europe, what we aspire to do is to be able to put pressure on China together with the United States, because I believe that this is the only weapon that we have. And this is the only option that we have to be able to get back on the right track, potentially. Ideally, that would be the goal, but to have an effective approach. Ms. Quartapelle, thank you, Commissioner. I think that what we've heard today is very interesting, especially if you consider what this committee has done in the past government, and Paolo Formentini submitted a resolution on religious freedom of religion and Uyghurs in China. I have a question on what is happening in China and your assessment. You mentioned agreements between Italian police and Chinese police, which have been carried out when China was different compared to the China that we see nowadays, especially considering the pressure of the Communist Chinese Party. And especially if you consider this change in political development in China, especially of the Chinese president, but everyone around him, his entourage. So what do you consider, what about the changes on religious freedoms, considering from an internal point of view in the Chinese government? Of course, it takes time for these things to change. And what should we expect? What will happen? Will things change, and how will things change in the foreseeable future? And how can we engage in dialogue with the new government and with the new Central Committee on this issue? Thank you.
Very much for your kind words, and thank you very much for the thoughtful question. Yes, you're right that China is different. The agreements that we sign is kind of outdated. This is why I genuinely believe, and this has been something that we have been repeating in public, not only the United States, the rest of the world need to look at a different approach. We have to acknowledge the problem. We have to own the problem. We have to come up with a very different strategic approach, because what we're dealing is a very different reality. The other point, the changes that you alluded is just a change that turned into a genocidal nature. But the Chinese government's view on either human rights, religious freedom, have been fundamentally different than what we believe. Human rights to the Chinese, as they often state, alleviating people out of poverty. So as the Hong Kong democracy activist who's jailed in Hong Kong today, he gave a very a compelling testimony at the CBS 60-minute interview. He said, Chinese essentially wants you to eat, sleep, and get up and repeat the same routine. You should not have a desire, you should not have longing, you should not have aspirations. So the poverty alleviation, as long as you have a food to eat, as long as you have a place to sleep, that's human rights for the Chinese. Number two, religious freedom didn't exist, only existed on paper. The Chinese constitution, in the case of Tibetans and Uyghurs, in autonomy law, in propaganda materials, they have a beautifully crafted language that religious practices are guaranteed. But in essence, the Chinese Communist Party acknowledged this repeatedly, starting the period of Deng Xiaoping, that Western ideology, the Western belief, Western religion, and the Chinese Communist ideology are antithetical or incompatible. But the Western leaders, leaders in the free societies, are not being truthful to recognize even something that the Communist Party acknowledges. Today, that change that they're referring to is the change in the text of religious teaching. They're using a synicization process, or through a synicization process, changing the text of the Bible and Quran. Because to them, religious practitioners of this particular religious group eventually, potentially cause political upheaval. What could be the reason for political upheaval? Because when you look at it, the Western religion, as they call it, comes with religious practices or belief that essentially tell you that there's a God that you should believe in, not the communist ideology. And there's also something called natural rights, like including your woman owning her own body, man and woman, husband and wife deciding when to conceive, how to conceive a child, instead of getting approval from the Chinese state. And that religious belief, that individual freedom that we all cherish, also allows a woman who's at the age of 50 say no when the government tried to make you go through forced sterilization. We're talking about middle-aged woman, as I profile in my book, forced to go through sterilization. The woman at the age of 50 may not have the ability to conceive. Even that kind of middle-aged woman's body is not left alone. So this is part of their campaign. And finally, they also, the change that they're talking about is a securitization of human rights and religious freedom. So anything that causes instability to the CCP or threatens or challenges the CCP's survival is folded in or integrated into the national security dialogue or approach. That need to be crushed with or without justifications. So those are the changes that Xi Jinping's China often make a reference to. It's a disturbing trend line. It is very concerning trend line. They're also using that kind of change in a positive, like as we speak, there's a Muslim delegation from a number of apologistic Muslim countries visiting China, visiting Urumqi, actually issuing declaration. In the events of the UN that you may have been aware of following, they have more countries, former Secretary of State said it rightfully and correctly, that China has its own league when it comes to human rights abuse and violations. And those countries happen to be Muslim majority countries, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Iran, all the stands in Central Asia, despite the fact that all the Central Asian stands, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, ethnically, culturally, linguistically, historically, essentially the same people as the Uyghurs. So this is a dilemma that we have to address. So in order to change that, I think we have to change our behaviors. I have a huge hope in the Western liberal democracy, Western Europe, leading democratic nations like Germany, France, Italy, in Europe to take the lead. And also we should not forget, the countries that I named lived through fascism, lived through Nazi Germany. Some European countries lived through communism. We've seen all of it, and we know exactly what happens in the end when we fail to take action.
Zara. Grazie per la.
Thank you for giving me the floor, and thank you for your remarks. I believe the West and all those who believe in a world made up by freedom need to hear your words, and perhaps we should even speak out more strongly so that we can increase the things we do. You began mentioning religious freedom, and you were able to clearly describe the difference between those who appreciate human beings as creatures who have been created free and as unique entities by a God. I'm saying this because I'm a Christian. And the difference between those who believe that human beings are a simple means of production, whose only human rights are limited to eating and sleeping, as you were saying. The difference between ourselves and Chinese communism or any other totalitarian approach is exactly that. And I think that the West, and of course the United States are our main ally, the West has to find the strength and the courage to reiterate, to firmly condemn any country which does the things you yourself were describing in this very important hearing of ours. So I want to thank you, and I want to say that I do hope that Italy's government and parliament can be increasingly supportive of the U.S. in this battle for civilization. This isn't a political or religious battle. It's a battle of civilization. And if I may, I'd like to ask you two questions, very simple questions. The first question is on the relationship between the Catholic Church and the Chinese People's Republic. And my second question refers to some news we read about in Italian newspapers regarding joint operations between some Italian law enforcement agencies and some Chinese law enforcement agents. These joint activities that the press was describing. Now, what is your assessment regarding the Catholic Church's choice to strike a deal with China when it comes to recognizing certain so-called religious freedoms? And again, the second question is this strange form of joint operations that many important Italian newspapers described in a number of articles, including a newspaper such as La Repubblica, which is a very well-known and important newspaper here in Italy. What do you think of these operations? Do you think we run the risk of having Chinese law enforcement agencies identifying dissidents living here in Italy? So these were the two questions I had for you, and thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your support and encouraging commitments. And I appreciate that we have, this is a challenge to the civilization. I genuinely agree. Some people don't like it. But as somebody who is in the middle of this, I can comfortably say this is about civilization. I don't want to live in a world. I don't want my children to live in a world govern in the Chinese government communist style. I don't want to live in a world, or I don't want my children to live in a world that the governments monitor private communications under the guise of national security. So there are a lot of concerns that I personally have, and I genuinely believe and I share your concerns. As for your questions, the Vatican's confusing relationship with the communist China is more than perplexing to me. The Catholic community in the United States have spoken out. The Catholics around the world, in Europe, have lended their voices for the Uyghur people. Specifically in the United States, Catholics were persecuted in the past. Knowing that history, remembering that history, Catholics have been extremely supportive. We have, I serve with two influential Catholic commissioners. They're lending all their support. I work with the Notre Dame University. Even the dean of Notre Dame Law School here in Rome criticized Vatican for not speaking out on behalf of the Catholics in China. We can just forget about the Uyghurs and other global issues for a minute, but Vatican's failure to speak out on behalf of those 8-9 million Catholics deserves attention. And I would like to see this change. And I also find it troubling and problematic, even calling the mainland Chinese authority out on the persecution of the Catholics. They should find a little bit more easier to find to lend voices on behalf of the Catholics in Hong Kong. We talk about elderly people who've been subjected to just people like Jimmy Lai, people like Cardinal Zenz. So that is something relatively easier. And also, it's very confusing to me. We've been talking about how naive the international community has been. I don't second guess those who promoted the idea of bringing China into our fold early on through trade, cultural exchange, education, technical support. I also agree with former Vice President Mike Pence that the United States helped to build China. I also agree with Secretary Blinken that China is the biggest beneficiary of international rules-based system. And guess what? They're not helping the civilization that you're alluding to. So the naivete that Vatican has displayed is something need to be addressed. You can sign tens and hundreds of agreements with China. China has proven time and time again that anything that they sign, anything that they say in their constitution is on paper only. I don't know the nature of their agreement. China is not going to let the Vatican to appoint bishops. It's not going to happen. I can't say mark my word. I hope it will change. But knowing China, knowing how the Chinese system works, it's not going to happen. So I wanted to, I have some opportunities to share my frustration with the Vatican. And I have been in the United States. I don't go out. I like to have a constructive dialogue. I like to see change. And this is two things. I want Vatican to say, stop religious persecution. The diverse society, the society respects religious freedom, actually naturally becomes a stable society. This has been scientifically proven. A country, the government, the society tolerant, respectful to different religious practices, naturally prosperous, happy society. It's a fact. And I would, as a Vatican, I would convey that message to the Chinese, and I'd like to see that happen. I'd like to rip off that agreement, or implement that agreement if there's such an agreement. And also, I want Vatican to lend their voices to people like the Uyghurs. It resonates. We're talking about a large chunk of global population, Catholic practitioners. If the Vatican speaks out, I can guarantee you that we will see a change. Oh, on the police, I think it's not only illegal, it's unconscionable for any government, any law enforcement to deal with MPS. MPS is actually the enforcer of the ongoing genocide. What on earth that a Western law enforcement agencies, including Italian police, have anything to do with the Chinese? Anything to do, like in some countries, a few years ago, I read in a report that Chinese judges are training foreign judges. We're talking about a repressive society. We're training judges from a semi-democratic country. This kind of behaviors need to stop. United States has also had some track record of having similar problem. A scientist from the MPS, Ministry of Public Security, managed to get into the lab at the Yale Medical School studying DNA sequencers. And that DNA samples happen to be the Uyghur samples. And the machinery that they use is made in the United States, Thermo Fisher Scientific. So we're all guilty on this, and this has to stop. I'm glad that we're having this conversation. Thank you for raising it.
Corsini in collegamento.
The Honorable Corsini, who is joining us online.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank our guest very much. I never would have wanted to hear what I had to say, since the things you said are so brutal. But just for time's sake, let me go straight to my question. You were saying that it's been 15 to 20 years that you have been striving to promote this battle of civilization. And my question is, from your point of view, has this issue become increasingly popular or well-known in the United States in recent years? Do you think the United States is more aware of the problems the Uyghur population faces? And since we're in Italy, do you think Europe and Italy and its citizens know enough about the plight of the Uyghur people? And what can we do in the future to make sure that this awareness does exist?
Thank you for the question. The first question is rather easy because I've been so immersed in the work, raising awareness in Washington and the United States, pushing for strong policy responses, and pushing for a legislative mandate. As you know, once we pass an act, it becomes a law. It has to be enforced, as I alluded earlier. Not only on the Uyghur issue, we have also been able to make a tremendous progress on the issues relating to Taiwan, on the issues relating to Hong Kong, on the issues relating to Tibet. The Uyghur issue has become a popular issue for a wrong reason. I wish there was no genocide. I wish they can left alone and be themselves and just live a happy life. As I remember, partly because I lived in China in the 1980s, life was not too bad, even though there was a political repression. I was able to speak my language. I was able to follow my family, engage in religious and cultural practices, daily routine. And I was able to educate in Uyghur all the way to college. I got all of my education in Uyghur language. That has not been the case. So the Uyghurs are very popular, and also I give a lot of credit to the United States government, particularly the lawmakers in legislative branch of our government, Congress, for having this amazing bipartisan support. When we passed the first bill, the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act, it was unanimous consent in the Senate, 406 votes out of 435 House rep. Unthinkable. And it was a joke because when that law was passed, there was very fragmented, controversial impeachment conversation was taking place in the US Congress, and yet people of polar opposite came together, passed that bill, which was remarkable. And how is this related to the United States concern? And people, this has also something to do with the Chinese disinformation campaign. It's not that the United States, and when you look at all of the presidents up until the previous administration, all of them, starting from Bush 41, all had good intention. Let's help the Chinese. Let's look at South Korea. Let's look at Japan, Germany. We can build a decent relationship with adversarial regime, repressive regime. And there have been policy papers written, there's memos written, there's speeches were made. They created this hopeful environment that everybody was cheering. I did not have voice. I was very frustrated. No one seemed to care. We missed warning signs. But that thinking, that approach got us pretty much where we are. And I don't question those who were get into that position with a good intention, but there is a lack of understanding of the true nature of the Chinese Communist Party that sets the foreign policy agenda, national defense budget, foreign affairs, foreign policy, domestic policy. NPS, the police, is essentially run by the Communist Party. The Chinese government, the term that we use, is not an actual accurate government. It's a party-ruled as a regime, Communist Party-ruled regime. So we've been making mistakes over and over. Through the genocide of the Uyghurs, through the upending of Hong Kong democracy, posing a threat to our democratic ally, Taiwan, a functioning democracy, a very active member of the community of democracies. I think the American people woke up. Unlike other parts of the world, American people have something very unique. It takes a while, but once figured out, they're very good in action. And also American people have something very unique, self-correcting ability. This has been displayed in the matter of the responses that we have seen. As a result, we have laws been passed. And I never thought that we would go after senior Chinese government officials under the Global Magnitsky Act. The individual that I mentioned early on was the first Politburo member, a Chinese politician, sanctioned under the Global Magnitsky Act. So I can't even keep track of the executive action in the presidential level. I'm following closely with the legislative actions. So it is great. It makes me proud of my country. It makes me encouraged, hopeful. But at the same time, this genocide is still ongoing. And this takes me to your next question. We need to have a global response. A genocide should not continue for 6 years. Why? I can't believe that we still, I'm grateful that you brought me here to hear me out, but a lot of people still not even interested. They still live in this fanciful land, wishful thinking that, this is not going to pass. I can say this quite comfortably, mark my word, this is a big problem. This is a slow motion climate crisis in a political sense and geopolitical sense that we have to deal with. This is not a storm that will pass overnight. So we need to be bold, a number of things in the recognition and focus on China's economic interests through the effort to clean up global supply chain of the slave labor produced products. Push back against China's digital authoritarianism that has been altering our way of life and threatening our liberty, threatening our sovereignty. If we can focus on those three issues that are dear and near to the hearts of the Chinese policymakers, we can be we can make progress. I'm very hopeful. I'm sorry, my answers are rather long. I wish this is as I said, there's so much is involved, and this is no longer. This is why I give my book a title, No Escape, to make sure that you get it, that you cannot also escape this reality. Because this is about you, about us as a global community.
3 copies of the book.
Did you hear that, Steve?
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President, and good afternoon, Commissioner. Thank you for your time. I have a question for you. I would like to ask if you believe there is the possibility that how China is being condemned for what they're doing to their population, to the Uyghur minority, if it can be criticized, and what other countries could do and what the United States could do to avoid this criticism. Thank you.
Do you mean were you referring to their response to our criticism, or I don't think that I understood.
I wasn't referring to who could criticize. But rather, if you believe that this condemnation can be criticized, maybe I can specify. So using this condemnation for economic reasons, for geopolitical reasons. So the risk of using this condemnation.
Let me try to untangle that question. So we have to make sure that we believe in what we're doing. We will also wanted to make sure that we recognize the issues. And then the steps will naturally follow. Today, we live in a world that people either think that somebody is exaggerating. You know, some governments actually factually say this is more common in the Muslim majority countries, that somebody is exaggerating, more information is needed. And then the other thought that is also preventing a kind of a global recognition is that, oh, the United States has to do this kind of stuff to prevent China to replace the United States. No, actually, no. That is also another misleading way of. And also the third one is, oh, if you criticize China, they won't talk to us. So well, let me explain one by one. The exaggeration part, or need more information. You can ignore or discount my comments, comments by the NGO representatives, activists, reporters, even governments that have officially recognized. But you cannot ignore the camp survivors' testimonies. We have actual human beings. I profiled some of them in my book who lived through this ordeal, this dehumanization, torture. Available, even come here to testify. They're in Europe. We also know that the Chinese government publicly shared a lot of information, like a government bidding for the construction of those camps. Let me highlight something. This is the largest incarceration of ethno-religious group since the Holocaust. This is a fact. And this is also based on Chinese government's own public open source data. On the forced labor issue as well, they have this thing called pairing, poverty alleviation, to put out statistics that also shows that there's an active enslavement, labor practices is underway. On the population control, they even publicly stated through their open source or public information that in one county alone, they were able to prevent population growth by 65%. This is not something that a Uyghur activist or American scholar or American journalist said. This is what they said. And also in a short period of time, they prevented natural population growth by 24%. The children's camp that I was mentioning earlier is also based on the Chinese government information. We have individuals who recognize their missing children in the Chinese TikTok messages. any propaganda promotional messages that a kid showed up sitting on the Chinese police lap, not recognizing that father, and bragging or complimenting that police, and complimenting, saying things like, my life is due to the Communist Party, knowing that that Communist Party, that leader, caused that family separation, or took that kid away from their parents. So there's overwhelming evidence. I cannot, even somebody who's in the middle of this, cannot keep up with the reports, keep up with the publications, investigative journalists. And the second point, the criticism by the United States government. As I said, the United States always wanted to have a decent relationship with China. Even today, we always said we have a responsible competition. We don't say that we are out there to regime change. We don't call names. We essentially did what we did to fulfill our treaty obligation by calling China for its behavior. This is not the first time and the last time. We also made a similar position on Myanmar. So this has been a responsible response by the United States government. And also, you have to think about, why would the United States, with such an intimate trade relationship with China, would do something to cause or hurt its own economic interest? And also, you have to ask yourself, why would the United States to hurt its own tech sector by imposing export control? And also, you have to ask yourself, why would the United States to impose some measures to close down a social menace like a Confucius Institute while there is people coming allegedly teaching Chinese? There's a genuine, serious concerns national security threat. In fact, the United States is not protagonist. We are responding to what came to us. So that's pretty much. And then I forgot my last explanation, the last narrative. Regardless, whatever you do will get Chinese attention one way or I remember now. You're not going to be able to please this regime. Whenever you say something, for example, our diplomats, I'm sitting with diplomats here, have been in a way put on a straitjacket because of what my government says publicly. They always use that as an excuse of not doing anything or push back. So even in the most ideal situation, climate crisis, for example, our government has been so actively, so eager to engage, even in this contentious relationship, we're not being able to make progress. The China still keep approving coal-powered power stations. Xi Jinping didn't even show up at COP26. Our special presidential envoy goes to Beijing, goes to China, sits in a room talking to his counterparts in a virtual through a virtual panel. So in order to make progress, you need to have eye to eye, and also you need to be on eye to eye contact, and also have to be on the same page. They are not on the same page. We're eager, but these are not the concerns. But they use this. Say, oh, if you talk too much about human rights, we're not going to talk about climate change with you. And the same method has been used. So I encourage the global community, policymakers, lawmakers like yourself, to be bold, truthful, and courageous. Call them out. That's how you get that message. And actually, that's how you get the Chinese respect as well.
Se posso ancora.
If I may just add a couple of further remarks after your answer. Italy's appeal is to be decisive, to be clear, and to show that and demonstrate that it is not the Uyghur minority, it's not that is being destroyed, it's not that Muslim religion cannot be practiced, it's that all religion or all belief is considered a threat to the stability of the regime. And this applies to Catholics, it applies to Falun Gong, it applies to Tibetan Buddhists, our beliefs, Western beliefs, are challenged, and that is why there can't be divisions, because in these divisions, in these cracks, then we risk weakening our freedoms.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.